All right, we are on week 3, and we are going to be comparing the British colonies. So the British colonies are rather unique because they run north to south along the Atlantic sea coast of North America. And because they have such different geography, we're going to see different resources and different trades come out of the different colonies, where each New Spain and New France were a little bit more similar in where they were settling and where the colonists were going. And so the trade doesn't vary as much as it does in the British colonies. So the essential question that we're looking for is who benefited and who lost. Anytime there's change, and there's definitely was change with colonization, huge change. Some people prospered and benefited, and other people lost. So that's one of the things that we're looking at, right? And we want to use evidence. So when we study history, we want to look at primary sources whenever we can. So with the class, I've included primary sources that you can look at. If you have an interest in more, please let me know. I'd be glad to help you out with that regard, especially if it's in one particular area. All right, so today we're looking at the pushes and pulls, people who were pushed to the colonies and people who were pushed out of the colonies. All right, people who were pulled to the colonies, people who were pulled out of England. Right, 3 regions. Triangular trade, which is similar to the Columbian Exchange. So triangular trade is a general overview of what was going on in that time. It wasn't a particular thing that you went to or a thing that you could hold in your hands. Very abstract idea, just like the Columbian Exchange. So the Columbian Exchange explains why we have French fries in Belgium and France when the potato is not native to that area. It was brought over from the Americas, right? Why are Italians known for tomato sauce? Because they have wonderful soil and a wonderful climate for growing tomatoes, but the tomatoes originated in the Americas and were brought over. Coming back, same thing with chocolate, Swiss and French chocolates. Why are they known German chocolates? Because they took a native product, a native plant from the Americas, and dare I say, made it better. Okay, and with sugar. So, chocolate is a wonderful resource to food product to look at, to say it's a combination, right? You have milk, which they had cows in Europe. You have the sugar coming from the Caribbean plantations, and then you're going to have the cocoa also coming from the Caribbean area. And so Europe creates this product of chocolate, and only one of the products was native to Europe. Right? The same thing with cows. Cows are not native to the Americas. There were no cows or pigs wandering around the Americas. There were no horses in the Americas. There were no apple trees in the Americas. There were no honeybees, all brought over. So we can look at good things that were brought over, but we also have negatives, of course. We have disease. We have people, not that religion in itself is bad, but the people maybe forcing their religion on somebody else we can see as a negative. Right. And then for some people, coming to the Americas was wonderful because it gave them a way to practice their faith and practice their religion. So the Columbian Exchange and triangular trade are abstract ideas that we help to explain how things changed and what we look at and how people were making money at that time. We're going to look at the government in the different colonies. Each colony was very unique, more so than each state is in the United States right now. All right, and the effect on different groups of people. So just to review, New Spain is being settled by conquistadors, and in the very name gives you the nature of what they're doing. They're conquering the area, they're conquering the people. These men were soldiers, and they were hired to conquer the land, right, and claim that land for Spain. And Spanish people quickly realized that sugar that was grown off the coast of Africa by the Portuguese start the sugar trade. The Portuguese start the enslavement of people from Africa onto sugar plantations. That the climate's fantastic, sugar is going to grow there, and man, that is where the money's at. It's either spices or sugar, because everybody wants it. Not everybody can wear silks. Not everybody needs porcelain or fancy dinnerware, but everybody's got to eat. And so sugar and spices becomes big, big, big money. Right. And so the Spanish quickly realized that. And then they're literally digging money out of the ground by digging up silver and gold. New France, on the other hand, you have two extremes. You have the Canadian area and the Mississippi River Valley being settled by fur traders, and then St. Lawrence River, the Great Lakes region, the Northern Atlantic area, you have the fishermen. And we're talking about like the big fishing boats going out and they're catching cod. All right. And then this cod can be salted and it's shipped back to Europe. And booming population in Europe. So they need fast food. And this is food that's basically processed and packaged. It's like buying something put in your freezer on sale. And so it travels really well. It's light and everybody's eating it. And then you also have the deer skin and beaver skins, and they're going to be brought back over and made into hats. Women's fashion is going to drive a lot of the French profits. All right. And so the French fur traders were known as the coureurs de bois, runners of the woods. All right. And then, not to leave out the plantations that the French had, the sugar plantations, indigo plantations, going to bring them a lot of wealth also. In fact, we can talk later about the Haitian Revolution, which starts on a island that's Haiti was a sugar plantation island. But today's focus is the British colonies. All right. And so always remember that when we talk about the colonies, we're talking about colonies in North America and Caribbean. Right. And it's very easy to forget that and just focus on those 13 colonies. But they're the ones who have the revolution. They're the ones that make the biggest change over time. And so we are not going to talk about the Caribbean ones much today. Our focus will be on the 13 colonies. All right. So the 13 colonies, the first one, and this is before they even get into the Caribbean really, is under Queen Elizabeth I. 1583, St. John's Islands off the coast of North Carolina. It's a failure. Roanoke Colony 2 years later, another failure. Roanoke Colony in 87, guess what? Another failure. Actually, it was surviving. They were getting by, but they needed supplies. They just had this tiny fort. It's on the coast of the island. They're surrounded by Native Americans, especially Crotons. And so Sir Walter Raleigh, they take the big ship that they have there, and they're like, hey, I'm going to make a run back to England. I'm going to pick up some supplies. I'll be right back. 6 months tops, I'll be back. Problem is, he gets to England, and Queen Elizabeth says, oh, Walter, dude, you are not going anywhere. No ships are leaving because I'm getting ready to fight Spain. Spain's been attacking me, and everyone's basically on lockdown. And so, while Sir Walter Raleigh is basically twiddling his thumbs, sitting back over in England, waiting and waiting and waiting, by the time he's able to go back in 1590, after the British beat the Spanish, no one's there. And so if you look up the Lost Colony, Roanoke Colony is known as the Lost Colony, they've disappeared. There was not a single person there. There was nothing left in the houses that they had. And all that they see, this is a sketch made about the event. Here they are, ready to help them out, and you see Croton carved into a tree. Historians still debate what happened to the people. Did a disease hit them? Were they attacked by Native people? Were they starving and broke up into small groups and went to live with the Native Americans for hope to survival? Honestly, we don't know. All right, so Queen Elizabeth I and those following her really didn't have a desire to spend money on exploration. They're like, hey, if you want to do it, talk to me. I'll give you a permission slip, but you've got to pay for it yourself. Okay. And so that's why with England we see joint stock companies. So why do I have the crown here? I have the crown because you still needed permission from the crown. And the crown would have to approve your company. You also had to have a home base office in the mother country. So if you're a joint stock company, you have to have a home office in England, and then you can go do what you want with your company outside of England. And that helps, honestly, the monarch watch you for tax purposes. All right, so notice the British colonies here in green. All right, I like this map because it shows us some of the Native American nations that are in that area. Because lots of times we tend to focus on 2 or 3, and there's over 500 Native American nations. If we were to write them just in the general part of North America, and if we were to just write the bigger nations, there'd be over 500. Like I know in the South Carolina area, you have the Yamasee. The Yamasee were a small nation. There's even a town of Yamasee, but there's no official nation of the Yamasee. The Catawbas, well, you see Yamasee here on the map, and they were actually a little bit lower also, a little further south. You have the Catawbas. The Catawbas are still a Native American nation. They have a reservation. They have a school. They do wonderful pottery. The Cherokee, you see that there's actually 3 groups of Cherokee. I actually live in Cherokee County in South Carolina, and there's actually a Cherokee Indian reservation that is in North Carolina. So when I'm listening to the weather, I always have to pay attention if it's Cherokee, North Carolina, or Cherokee in South Carolina. And then you also have the Western Band of Cherokees. So what happens is later on in 1800s, you're going to get the Trail of Tears under President Johnson, and the Cherokee that are still living in that area are going to be pushed to the west onto reservations. Well, some of them escape and hide out in the mountains. And so they're 2 very distinct nations at this point, 2 very different cultures, but they all came from the Cherokee that were on the East Coast. Right, you see Spanish Florida there. Right, notice there's that orange area, okay, and the orange are the Dutch. There was also a New Sweden in there. So among where the English are going to be settling, you have a Dutch colony and you have a Swedish colony in the beginning. They're going to get pushed out. Nothing against the British, but when I think of British, I think of capital B bullies. Right, they're always pushing others around. Right, so again, we're looking at how do you get there? Are you pushed there? Are you pulled there? So let's start with a group that you are probably fairly familiar with, and that's the Jamestown colony. You may or may not. That is the first colony that is settled that's successful. Right? They are a joint stock company. They were there for profit. Right? And so you have the adventurers in the joint stock company, who are the people who pay the money. They're going to pay for the ship. They're going to pay for the soldiers. They're going to pay for the food for the voyage over. They're going to pay for the supplies that you need. Right? They're also going to take part of your profits. And then you have people who sign on as planters. And planters are the men who came to do the work. And the idea was they were basically contracted laborers, almost indentured servants, that they would work so many years and then they would get a portion of the profits. And the idea is they thought, hey, we read about what New Spain's doing. We're going to find some gold in the other part of the Americas. And they really went there to find it out. So I'm going to send you one of the videos you're going to watch this week is a scene from Pocahontas called Mine, Mine, Mine. Now, Pocahontas, the movie, has pluses and minuses. There's a lot of minuses, but that one scene of Mine, Mine, Mine is very good to show you who are the adventurers, who are the planters, what are they there for, what are they doing when they're there, who's being affected. So it's a very short clip. And so we tend to think of adventurous people as people who want adventure. They want to be put on edge. Not so much with this. If you are an adventurer, you're just sitting home in England putting up some money. You are taking adventurous risk on the colony. So if you want to put it that way. All right. So that's the first one. But let's go to the Southern Colonies, because that's where Virginia is. And I grew up in a northern colony, and I really don't think of Virginia as southern, but that's what it is. All right, so Southern Virginia. oh, excuse me, the Southern Colonies, and Virginia being the first one of all of the colonies. Does that make sense? I hope so. It's the first of the 13 colonies in North America, and it's in the southern region. All right. So it's financed, and the goal was to find gold and set on forts. And so even in this sketch that you see, here's the happy men. Notice they're all clean, well-shaven, hair's not long. They look great for having sailed several weeks on a ship across the Atlantic. And they arrive and they plant their flag, and they're like, hey, here we are, right, in the land. And there's a good video you're going to watch this week about the settling of Jamestown. All right, so this is the area. We have 5 colonies that are going to be in the southern area. And our map says Indian land. So please don't take offense to that. That is the word that they would have used at the time. We would not say that today. We would say it was Native American land. And all the land, honestly, was Native American land. But the reason that's there is because by the time we get to the 13 colonies, by the time we get to the 1760s, there were no official colonies built past the Appalachian Mountains. People were living there. European people were living there, but they were not officially allowed to be living there. There weren't any official colonies. Okay, so that was basically land where the native people were able to live. So the top part, we have Maryland, Virginia, Carolina, and Georgia. And one way to think about the southern colonies is they're all named after English kings or queens. So Maryland is named after King Charles' wife, Mary. Virginia is named after Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen. The Carolinas are named after King Charles. And so Carolina is, Carolus is the Latin name for Charles. The French also had a Fort Caroline, and they were actually there before the English were. And then they got kicked out by the Spanish and Native Americans. And then Georgia is the very last of the 13 colonies. That's named after King George. All right, so this is a picture of the Museum of Jamestown, Virginia, that you can go and visit. So there's actually 2 places if you ever get to Jamestown. There's the actual area where Jamestown was. And that is a living archaeology site. So they're constantly digging up. And if you're interested, there's some great documentary YouTube videos where they actually found a water well and were digging up some of the original stuff that basically people threw down the water well or fell down the water well that they have found from the 1600s. I find it interesting. And then you have a restoration village that you can go to where you have enactors and you go through and you can see what life would have been like in Jamestown. So 2 different areas. So Jamestown, which was originally named James Fort in 1607, is the first successful British colony. So what's so great about the southern colonies? This picture is Savannah, by the way, a beautiful Savannah in the riverfront. Great natural harbors, as you see here. Charleston and Savannah, both huge cities, still big shipping cities. Great soil, nice climate, lots of rain, perfect for farming. Rivers. And rivers were important for transportation because you don't have trains, you don't have trucks. Yes, you have wagons, but wagons break down and you don't really have roads that are maintained yet. So the quickest and easiest way to move things is on a river. Right. And so how does the South make their money? Through plantations, through crops, through farming. But these are big business farms. All right. So Virginia, really what saved Virginia, because obviously they were not finding any gold in Virginia, was John Rolfe brings back some tobacco. And they realized tobacco grows very well. Tobacco likes cool nights, and so grows wonderfully. That's really what saves that colony. The Carolinas are going to be even better. They're very similar to the plantations in the Caribbean. They're going to grow indigo and rice. And rice, this is a picture of rice growing in the Carolinas. And it was called Carolina gold. So think about it. There's really a couple of reasons for that, right? It looks gold, grown in the Carolinas, and it's making them gold. It's making them filthy rich. And so to grow rice, you have to have a lot of fresh water. It does not grow in salt water. You also need a lot of labor. Well, people who lived on the western portion of Africa were already growing rice. So sadly for the people who live there, that area becomes a huge area for slave labor and pushing people to travel over and be sold into slavery because they already knew how to do the farming. They knew how to plant rice and care for it. It's a very long crop to grow. You start planting in March. All right. And cotton doesn't come along till later. A lot of people think, well, the Carolinas got wealthy, South got wealthy on cotton. Until the cotton gin is invented, it was really rice and indigo that they're making their money on. All right. What religions do you see in the Carolinas? Southern Colonies, excuse me. So Maryland was actually created as a Catholic colony. It was the idea of like, hey, New England's got their own people up there that separated away, and they're doing their religious thing. And Catholics, nobody likes the Catholics in England. It's a Protestant nation, and so it starts off as a Catholic nation, colony, excuse me. And later on, it actually moves to a more Protestant. And once again, the Catholics are sort of pushed out. So at first, Catholics are pulled to that area, but over time, the land, the fishing is great, and you're going to have other people pulled. And they sort of push the Catholics out. The Carolinas, we're going to see a lot of French Huguenots. So it was the opposite problem in France with the Catholic king. If you were not Catholic, you were persecuted. And so a French Huguenot is someone who is not a Christian, who is not a Catholic in France. And so they're pulled there because they're basically being pushed out of their own country. Scottish people, again, for the same reason. All right. They don't want to join the Church of England. England is taking over more of Scotland. And so the Highlands, the mountains of the Carolinas, really pull the Scottish people to that area. All right. So New England. So now let's go back to the north. So the first successful of the 13 colonies is Jamestown, Virginia. That's in the south. The second successful colony is going to be in what we call New England. And notice it's religion, religion, religion. All right. So in New England, we have Massachusetts. And there were really two colonies at first, Massachusetts Bay and the Plymouth colony. And sometimes you'll see Plymouth with Plimouth as a spelling. Okay, Maine was actually part of New France. So here's again, we see Massachusetts where it sits in, and it shows you again, this map you can see is a little bit different. Okay, and this is with New Netherlands. All right, and then New England area is there also. And you see Pennsylvania is in yellow on the western side. It's just interesting to me as you look at the maps, how they change so much, how the details change. And you can see that Massachusetts is really well drawn here. All right, so let's talk about those first settlers. All right, what's the plan? The plan was to arrive in an area on the Hudson River. So some background on the people that are coming to settle next. This is the ship, the Mayflower. Okay, perhaps you heard a more modern term for the people are pilgrims, but they never call themselves that. So you have people who are separatists in England. And in England, you're supposed to go with the flow of the monarch. If the monarch's Catholic, you're Catholic. The monarch is with the Church of England, you're with the Church of England. The separatists were having none of that. They want to separate away from the Church of England. So they go and live in Holland for about 10 years. But it's very hard for them to find work. The Dutch are very much for freedom of religion, and they don't like that either because they want their own freedom of religion, but they don't want to be around other people freely expressing their religion. So they say, we will go to this new place, and we don't want to go in Jamestown because those people are Church of England. But the Dutch have this area of New Netherlands, so we know how to get along with the Dutch, and we'll just sort of like go in between, somewhere's in between them. So they get on the ship and they leave Plymouth Harbor. They set at sea for 65 days. Can you imagine 65 days on a ship? I can't imagine what they were eating by the end of 65 days. And so this storm comes along, and because they're under sail power and ocean currents, they're blown off course. And they arrive way far north of where they should be. Okay, so you can see in this, they were heading for Virginia. Instead, they end up by Cape Cod. So there's two groups of people on this ship. One, we would call more adventurers. The people, the separatists, or who we would call the pilgrims today, they would refer to those adventurous people as strangers. So you're either in or you're out of their club. You're either a separatist or you are not. So you have about half the people are men, and they're just going to find their wealth and fortune, and they're going to probably hang around the Jamestown area when they get there. The other people are families, and they're sailing for religious freedom. All right. So it's definitely a mix of people that we have on the ship. And then you have to realize you have sailors, you have a sea captain. There's going to be soldiers that are coming along to protect them from pirates or anything else that happens to them. And so there's a mix of people on these ships. So on the Mayflower, you have 102 people total. 37 were separatists, and they brought with them 13 servants. So these are not poor families. Can you imagine being a servant? Hey, we're moving. You might want to write your folks. Oh, you're moving? Okay, where are we moving to? Oh, I don't know, someplace over across the Atlantic. Right? And so if you were not part of the separatist church, you were considered a stranger to them. All right, so eventually we're going to see two major groups in the New England area, separatists and Puritans. And Puritans want to purify the church. So the word pilgrim means somebody goes on a religious crusade to go someplace. And that's a more modern term. They never call themselves pilgrims. All right, so the geography in New England, long cold winters, mild summers. As you can see in this picture, hilly and mountainous, not good for farming. Very rocky soil. So how are they going to make a living? Okay, they're going to have small gardens to grow some small crops for their own kitchens, but they're not going to grow farms for business. But what they're going to do is what the French are doing. Salted codfish. All right. They're also going to get a huge whaling industry, that whole New England northern area, huge whaling industry. Shipping. You have to build ships. Well, they have forest land for building ships. You have to repair them. So you're going to see shipping companies. Huge, huge business and money coming out of there. And so this is going to be one of the points of the triangular trade also. All right. And so again, they have furs. So these are English people who are doing some fur trading, and also forestry. In fact, forestry was so important that a job you could get was to be a king's, basically, forest ranger. And you went through the forest and on people's property and marked the trees that would make good masts for the ship. And so the king had the right to take any tree they wanted from your property if they felt it was good, and they would mark it. And in fact, I think it's New Hampshire that has an evergreen tree on its flag. And that's because they had several rebellions over that. People didn't feel it was right for the king to take the trees from their land. Middle colonies, mix, right? So we think of Southern colonies, we're thinking of soil, the slavery, right? When we think of northern colonies, we're thinking of religion, New England area. Think of middle colonies, it's a mix. Right? So some people are going for religious freedom. Some people are going for glory. Some people are coming for gold or make their wealth in farming or other business opportunities. So we have to also mention that before the English get there, the Dutch are there. Remember, that's where the people on the Mayflower were heading. Okay. And so you see that large yellow area, that was New Netherlands. And then the lower green section, that was New Sweden. All right. And then you see where New England is, that red area. Okay. That's the area where the Plymouth colony and the Massachusetts Bay colonies are. And here comes those English bullying themselves around. And in 1667, they basically took it from the Dutch. So I've included this map with your primary sources. There's quite a lot to look at and pick up on in this map. Right, so the middle colonies, we have New York, which was owned by the Dutch, and it was New Netherlands, and it's called New York after the king's brother, the Duke of York. We have New Jersey, which is named after the island of Jersey in England. We have Pennsylvania, named after William Penn, and Delaware. Delaware probably has the most interesting name. So there's a nation of native people known as the Delawares. And Delaware used to be part of Pennsylvania. And there's also the first governor of Virginia was known Delaware. That was his last name. And that name sort of transfers over to the Native Americans that are there at the time. And we end up with this colony of Delaware. But there is a Delaware Native American nation group. All right, so what religion? We see a mix. In the photo, we have Quakers, but we have Jewish people coming. We have different Christian groups. We have Catholics, we have Lutherans, we have Presbyterians. Quakers are another Christian group that are going to settle in Pennsylvania. But most of them are basically, they're there to just take care of their own family needs. So these are families. They're not as concerned with other people's religions, like you do you, I'll do me. We'll live together in harmony, ebony and ivory. All right, geography. Flatland, hills, mountains, really good harbors, the Chesapeake Bay area. Good climate and land. It's the middle. It's not too cold. It's not too hot. It's a fantastic area for growing crops. So it becomes the breadbasket because it is feeding the other colonies. So one thing to think about is that there's trade within the colonies. New England isn't just sitting there by itself. You know, New England can't grow a lot of wheat. But the middle colonies can. So the middle colonies are going to trade with New England area. And, you know, New England is going to have some things that, you know, they don't have. Oh, you have furs. Well, we could use furs. Or, oh, you have whaling materials, right? The oil and such. Well, we could use that. So there's a lot of trading back and forth just within the land part of the colonies. In middle colonies, we're going to see a mix of economics. So you have the breadbasket, those big family farms. But you also see a lot of shipping because if you're trading with Europe, you need ships, right? Logging, textiles. So this is one area that we really see a lot of weaving, and that's because they can grow flax and they can grow linen seed to make textiles out of. You also see paper making. Again, what do you make parchment out of? Linen and flax. And so paper making with trees. So this is really an industrious area that you see. And it's just a huge mix, and there's so many opportunities to make money. All right. So in New England, we see religious freedom, mostly just for their group. So the separatists really wanted to separate. You couldn't come join their club. If you weren't going to be part of their church, they didn't want you there. All right. They do profit from trade. And eventually they weaken their laws and they do let other people in. And we see families because it's families that's religious. And so how do you keep your religion moving forward? You bring your family. We're also going to see a lot of education in the New England area. In fact, the first university, Harvard, is created in New England. The middle colonies. You see a lot of people coming for religious freedom. You have the Quakers coming in. You have different groups that are coming in. A lot of wealth. City of Philadelphia, one time is the largest city in the colonies. All right, New York City. A lot of farming, a lot of families again in the middle colonies. So you don't see the big business farms, but you have a lot of farmland. We still do today. Southern colonies. Maryland was set aside for Catholics, and that changes over time. A lot of wealth from trade with the plantations, so you're going to see a lot of slavery. But you'll see slavery in each of these areas. You would just see the most in the Southern colonies. So talking about enslavement, all right, we talked about this last week, that 1.3 million people come to the New World, and most of these are going to be coming to the 13 colonies. And most of them are going to be coming in the beginning as indentured servants. So as people hear stories of the wealth and the land that's there and the weather and how people are doing well, more and more people go over. So triangular trade, right? So think about 3 key points that we're looking at. You have trade or finished goods coming from Europe. You have people being pulled or pushed out of Africa. And then you have the Americas. Okay. So let's take, for example, in Europe, they have a lot of cloth factories. People do a lot of weaving there. They have a lot of textiles. Metal pots and pans, gunsmiths, right? So those goods are going to be sold to people in the colonies as well as be traded for people in Africa. So if we go from starting with in the European area, right, and then we go down to Africa. So the trade goods are traded for people in Africa. People in Africa, enslaved, sent on a ship across the Middle Passage, they arrive in the Caribbean. So a captain doesn't make money if his ship's empty. So once you sell those slaves, you have an empty ship. So what do? You fill it with trade goods. So in the Americas, we see what we call the raw materials. They're not really ready to be brought into your home yet. So it's tobacco, but it's not rolled into cigars. It might not be shredded. It might not be made ready for pipes yet, right, and put into pretty boxes. The sugar may not be ready for processing yet. Indigo, that's the blue leaf there. Fur skins, you're just getting the fur skins. It's going to be the milliners in Europe who are actually going to turn them into hats and wearable products. And so it's sort of strange to think about it, but so if you have some lumber and you sell lumber to somebody in England, they might turn it into furniture. And then you own a plantation and you want to make your house beautiful because you're a wealthy person, you're going to buy some furniture from Europe. So sometimes the goods went back and forth, just from the Americas to Europe and back again. But in general, we see this just huge revolving. It was like an interstate, huge amount of trade. And generally we see the general flow. So raw materials would not be going to Africa. Okay. Finished goods are going to Africa, but finished goods are also going to be going to the Americas. All right. This map is another view of the triangular trade, right? And you see the trade goods that are going into that western coast of Africa. And then you see the purple arrows are going clockwise from top, right? Green to red to blue. And then you see the yellow arrows are going the other way. They're going counterclockwise from green finished goods to the Americas, right? And then they do have some materials that are going back from the colonies. All right. And then you also see that those purpley, the lighter purple, and notice there's trade between the Caribbean and the northern part of the Americas. So there's trade going all over. This is a map of enslavement, the African slave trade from 1500s to 1870. So if you look at the thickness of the purple arrows, and you can see where people were going who were enslaved. You may not have thought of it, but you see some people being taken to Europe. You see a majority of people going to South America, into the Portuguese Brazil. All right, and then down to that one trading post that's down in South America, which is also going to be Spanish. And so we see that it's not just that they were coming straight to the Caribbean and then on to the Americas. It was, again, because we have the Portuguese, the Dutch, the Spanish, the English, the French, right? Everyone's got a Caribbean island. Everyone has plantations. That is where the biggest wealth is in the beginning, at least from 1500s to about 1700. And then we're going to start to see that those 13 British colonies really take off. All right, so again, we looked at this last week, but we just see that by 1760, migration is really taking off. The British colonies are really doing well. All right, so what do we see with English exploration, right? England, being a Protestant nation, did not feel the need to send any missionaries out. So the monarchy is not going to be sending anyone out representing the English church. All right. So they do have a lot of competition with Spain. In fact, Queen Elizabeth is noted for basically allowing people to pirate the Spanish gold and silver ships. They were known as sea dogs. Okay. She's quite happy with that. And then they're also looking for greed, increased land in Spain. So there's a lot of competition between Spain and England in the beginning. And that's sort of what drives it. And it drives that competition within the colonies. All right, so let's look at the impacts that were there. So as far as the English were concerned with Native Americans, they were more get out of our way. I mean, we know the stories, if you've heard them, about Native Americans helping, the Powhatans helping Jamestown, the Wampanoag, Squanto helping the people in New England and Plymouth Bay area. But quite honestly, once the British were helped and they were on their feet, they were like, get out of our way. And they're actually known, there was a few wars with Native Americans in the New England area. One specific war known as King Philip's War. And the Native Americans who were captured and taken as prisoners, many of them were sent to the Caribbean to be enslaved. So they really just wanted them out of their way. All right. And of course, the English are bringing diseases like smallpox that there's no immunity for. Some of the Native Americans, again, if they're captured and fighting, can be taken as indentured servants, which mean over time they could earn their freedom. But we really see a loss of culture overall, right? There's no way we can deny that. Africans bought from slave traders, used for farm labor. A loss of culture for the slaves, and also a loss on the people who were left behind. And again, you're going to see enslaved people in all 13 colonies. You're also going to see free people of African background, especially in the middle colonies and the New England colonies. So there's, in the Southern colonies, not so many, but in the beginning, and even Jamestown in the beginning didn't treat people from Africa as slaves. They treated them as indentured servants, but they quickly realized that they could make more money and it would be a lot easier to just enslave them for their lives. And so that changes. But there was a time when it wasn't the true slavery that we think of. It did change, but that changed very quickly, way before the 1700s. All right, so that's it. And so who's benefiting? Of course, we have the English nation is benefiting. The wealthy people going over are benefiting. Definitely some families benefited. And some people had a very hard time. There's definitely primary sources out there where people said that they were treated horribly as indentured servants. Some people didn't survive their contracted time and died. And of course, if you were a Native American or somebody who was either pushed off the land or pushed into the land, that is by no means a positive at all. There's no way to look at that as a positive. But we can look at those impacts in New France and in New Spain, especially. All right, so that's it for the British colonies. If there's a certain area that you're interested in, something more that you're wanting to know, please reach out to me, and I'd be glad to help you there.